Psst, check out my Patreon. Blundercup? I mean, I don't really see how this episode is Buttercup's blunder, considering what happens to her isn't really a careless mistake. The villain invades the privacy of her home and smothers her while she sleeps. I don't really see how that's Buttercup's fault, but I guess I'm getting ahead of myself for those of you that haven't seen the episode. The good news is that we have a great episode on our hands today, coming in as the first Buttercup episode of the season. And no, unlike her sisters, this is not the only one. Blundercup's only real blunder is the title itself. My goodness, there hasn't been an episode this good since The Trouble with Bubbles, I'd say. This has easily won me over as one of the best episodes of the reboot, outright. Despite my disdain towards the overabundance of Buttercup love that the series tends to lean towards, that's not enough to deter me from noticing the prowess of this episode's story. In fact, I'm almost certain that if the series started out with these Season 3 episodes as Season 1, the show would have been slightly better received because, let's be honest, the frequency of cultural references has died down remarkably, and the heroes fighting villains has become a premise for the majority of these episodes. Sure, there are still examples of that here and there, such as Bubbles' lingo from Largo, but fights are more than just the girls getting knocked down over and over again in one hit, and the running gags finally aren't overdoing it. Even with the shitty episodes like Treble Clef, Can't Buy Love, and Largo, I'd still say they aren't as bad as their Season 1 counterparts. I mean, seriously, nothing comes close to Once Upon a Townsville, Painbow, any of that. It's too bad that the damage was already done, and there's really no saving this series now, mostly because it's already cancelled. But that aside, Blundercup is certainly a diamond in the rough, so let's shift to a more positive point of view and get into what makes this so great. We begin with Buttercup, and next we get a montage in which we witness her do all of these totally radical and extreme tricks to try and impress everyone who's watching her. And I do literally mean everyone watching her. Turns out she's got her own not YouTube channel now, like Bubbles and her beauty blog, and is posting videos of herself being awesome online for anyone and everyone to see, including her sisters, of whom she asks for criticism regarding her latest work. Blossom ain't that interested or impressed, but Bubbles, on the other hand, has some rather beneficial words to say.
I think it was aggressive, yet inspiring.
I like to imagine this is a callback to the episode 15 Minutes of Fame, which we've seen a few other times so far this season, where Bubbles was first introduced to video editing. This is also hinted at in Treble Clef, another episode where she is tasked with editing the music video together, for those of you that have seen that review. Honestly, I find video editing a much more fitting activity for Bubbles to partake in that involves computers instead of computer programming, but that's just me. Blossom, as I mentioned, is unimpressed with Buttercup's video and asked her to make dinner for the three of them, but that doesn't do her any good.
The next day.
You could have used Tom Kenny for that. I'd also like to point out that in Buttercup's video, it actually shows that she's late to math class, but this isn't the same teacher she had in honors math when she was in Buttercup versus math, so either the show did not care about the continuity between those episodes, or she got dropped down to regular math. The next morning, we bear witness to similar events that preceded us the previous day, only this time they're taking place in real time as opposed to through a YouTube video, and Buttercup seems to be experiencing some more trouble than usual. She fails to turn off the alarm clock, she trips and falls at school, she can't even get food out of the fridge without eggs dropping on top of her. Needless to say, she is not having a good day and tells her sisters that she's going straight home after school instead of meeting them at Penguin Pete's because she's starting to not feel so good. Oh yeah, Penguin Pete's is that ice cream parlor that gets mentioned every so often. It's the one where Donnie introduced his friend Chelsea in Odd Bubbles Out, or where the girls went after their dentist appointment in Tooth or Consequences.
You're coming!
All of a sudden, Buttercup gets blasted in the head with a milk jug, which is actually a reference to another comment that was made the previous night.
That was the school's last kickball. We're down to playing with an old plastic jug.
See, that's good. I'm glad that a minor detail like that came back into play in the story. It's a case where a detail isn't completely random and is actually used to tie some events together. Barry proceeds to get the milk jug back from Buttercup, but gets scared off by the abnormal deformation of her head, and things are starting to get a little weird, wouldn't you say? Thus, the green one proceeds to head home, but feels noticeably woozy as she walks in the door, and soon she heads upstairs where the truth is revealed to her.
I am sweating like crazy. I'm melting!
Yep, she is literally Buttercup now, as her entire body is composed of nothing but melted butter, resulting in a huge panic attack that anyone would likely experience should their own body undergo the same transformation. And this is why I said the title was the only blunder the episode really had, because what about this makes her Blundercup exactly? The episode is a literal interpretation of the butter part of her name, so shouldn't the title be reflected as such? I mean, I could see a case where the reboot didn't want the title to give anything away, although it does that in plenty of other episodes, so why should it be any different here? But that doesn't matter, because the title card is a giant stick of butter anyways. I get that just naming the episode Buttercup is very plain and uninteresting, and I would never advocate doing such a thing, but I could come up with a much better title than this. I can't believe it's not Buttercup. And in fact, I'm so incredibly proud of coming up with that one that that's the title of this video. Seriously. Huge missed opportunity there. Her sisters come knocking at the door asking how she beat them home so fast, which confuses Buttercup because she never went to the ice cream parlor after school, so why would her sisters ask her how she got there before them? Well, because her sisters say that she did go there with them, which obviously freaks Buttercup out even more than she is already, so she heads to Penguin Pete's to figure out what's going on. Sure enough, she sees her doppelganger inside, just like her sisters said, and pretty soon said doppelganger approaches her when she steps out the door. This doppelganger, who I'm going to refer to as Butters for the remainder of this video, not as a South Park reference, but because this character is never actually given a name, seriously, it's not even listed in the episode's credits, explains to Buttercup that their dream of being a superhero came true, but it wasn't what they had expected. See, turns out that some time ago, Butters was an ordinary kid that just wanted to be a superhero and fight bad guys, but then one fateful day at the county fair, things took a turn for the worse.
My DNA must have fused with the butter.
Turns out there was an accident at the fried butter stand that they just so happened to be working at, where the nuclear butter reactor, I'm not making this shit up, malfunctioned and caused a massive explosion, resulting in Butters' DNA to infuse with, well, butter, turning them into some kind of butter creature. What initially seemed like a dream come true quickly became a nightmare when Butters realized that their butter powers weren't as great for fighting crime as they had hoped they would be. The way I'd put it, the blessing had become a curse.
Dogs chased me. People cowered at me, then chased me. I couldn't even drive.
Hey, are you even old enough to drive?
This of course caused Butters to become jealous of many other superheroes who do have amazing powers, but they could never do anything about it. That is, until one fateful day when they stumbled upon Buttercup's videos online. The very same videos that Buttercup was gloating about at the beginning of the episode. Turns out that those videos were her downfall because it allowed Butters to track her down and use her quote, butter fusion powers to steal her body and identity, leaving Buttercup with a crummy butter body instead, even though that's not how fusion works. But I guess one thing her butter body was good for was allowing them to swap bodies with somebody else. So if they swapped bodies, then why did it take so long for Buttercup to transform into the butter? Is it a slow process? And did Butters also take time to convert to having Buttercup's shape, or was it instant for them? I don't know. Well, now Butters has everything they've ever wanted, and despite Buttercup's feeble attempts to stop this from happening, Butters just zaps her with laser eyes and melts her down the drain. What a nightmare, I tell you what. One of the best types of stories that always strikes fear in me are these stolen identity plots where a character has their body or identity just taken away from them. Or if they even get trapped in some prison unable to stop their doppelganger, who now has control of their life, from doing whatever they want with their body. That restriction of freedom just terrifies me, and the plot is a surefire way to both interest me and disturb me internally at the same time. Butters follows through with that plan here and continues living on as Buttercup, beating up monsters left and right with nobody standing in their way. And hey, look, more than one monster design. Although, yep, there's the lobster monster, right on cue. We return to the Utonium residence where Blossom and Bubbles are unimpressed with Buttercup's butt whoopings because to them, it's just another day in the life. Little do they realize that that isn't their sister sitting next to them. Butters never reveals this to anybody, by the way, and Buttercup doesn't get the idea to tell her sisters either. I mean, I don't see why not, seeing as she could get her sisters' help in getting her body back, but hey. Nevertheless, they send Butters off to the kitchen to make dinner, although Butters begins to resent them for it because it's getting in the way of optimal superhero time. Still, this provides the perfect opportunity for Buttercup to get revenge.
I smell butter. Hello, Butterfingers.
Thus, the two begin to duke it out mano-a-mano, and a bitter, buttery brawl that lasts more than a few seconds breaks out. Truthfully, it's one of the best action sequences in the entire reboot, not only because there's some actual contact between the two of them, but because there are actual stakes riding on this too. Usually, the fights don't amount to much and feel very insignificant whenever they do happen in this show because there isn't a lot riding on them. I rarely feel the character's distress when there's something on the line. Blundercup is an outlier though, because for once, I actually had no idea how the episode was going to turn out. And again, the very concept intrigues me, which helps. The two go back and forth with each other, with Buttercup leaving Butters astonished at her mastery of the butter powers, considering Butters never really found them all that useful. How many times am I gonna say butter in this video, seriously? The fighting isn't perfect, but it's certainly passable. We see some legitimate contact and agility being used in this close quarters fight. Buttercup then proceeds to state this idea that it's not the powers themselves that make a hero, it's how you use them, which is a pretty reasonable lesson to learn, I gotta say. The way Buttercup learns to use these powers isn't seen, but that's not necessary. It does make the message come off a little fast though. Perhaps if it had just a bit more time in the sun before being presented, it would feel a bit more natural, but it's not forced the way things have been in previous cases. In fact, it even opens Butters' mind up to the idea, and they proclaim that Buttercup will get her body back.
I've got to embrace my powers and be myself. I'll give you your powers back. Whoa, really? No! I love being you!
Psych, we've got a fake out, which leaves Buttercup wide open to be blasted with heat lasers, leading to a climactic final attack made by Buttercup that ends in a hit flash cut to black, which brings an end to the scene. We then fade into Blossom and Bubbles on the couch, who are completely starving after waiting on Buttercup to make dinner for so long. Of course, since Buttercup was a little preoccupied with something more life-threatening, dinner never got made and the girls proceed to starve. Buttercup tries to give this monologue explaining her struggle and how she managed to overcome it and triumph, but the other girls don't really buy it and chalk it up as just another excuse that will get her out of making dinner.
And then I realized, it's not my powers that make me a superhero. It's me, Buttercup.
Now I don't know if it's just me, but if you listen closely to the timbre of Buttercup's voice, I'm having a very difficult time trying to tell if that's our original Buttercup or Butters pretending to be Buttercup. The pitch of her voice is somewhere in between the two, vague enough to be where I can't exactly easily distinguish one way or another, and I think this was done intentionally, seeing as the final battle between Buttercup and Butters is cut short before we see a well-defined victor. Perhaps this is one of those non-canonical episode endings that's supposed to be left open to interpretation. Maybe Buttercup switched their bodies back and melted away Butters forever. Maybe Butters succeeded in mopping up Buttercup and has successfully taken her place permanently. I don't know if there's supposed to be a correct answer here, but just the way it's presented feels like it's purposefully ambiguous.
Ah! What did you do to me? I took your powers. But how? I'm glad you asked. Did you get new superpowers? No. I just figured out how to use yours! But now I'm back, sisters. And I'm going to make everything right from here on out.
However, if we're to consider the fact that the reboot does have some form of continuity across episodes, it is safe to assume that the original Buttercup is in her old body because Butters wouldn't be able to recall other past events the way Buttercup would. Or maybe this episode is just non-canon, like I said. Who knows? There's enough rasp in her voice to the point that I am leaning a little bit more towards original Buttercup, and maybe this is just a side effect of getting used to having her old body back, but at the same same time, I'm not quite sure. It really makes you think, and I've always loved episodes of shows or movies that leave an open ending like this up to personal interpretation. That sort of thing always leads to a great discussion. So in that case, who do you think ended up coming out on top? I could honestly see an argument going either way because it's just so unclear, so I'm curious to know what you would personally prefer. Hopefully this review did a good job of explaining exactly why I enjoyed this episode so much. The story, the villain, the action, the lack of egregious humor or characters, everything came together here and resulted in a very solid reboot episode. Honestly, it just makes me wish more episodes were like this one because then the show would probably be considered decent by most people. This episode signifies to me that the reboot did have the potential to tell great action stories again that can be taken seriously. And if it weren't for my reviews, I never would have discovered how much of a pleasure it was to watch this episode. I would have dropped this series all the way back in season 1. I'm not saying this is on the level of like Avatar: The Last Airbender or anything, but a pleasant surprise nonetheless for a Powerpuff Girls 2016 episode. I'd even go far enough to say this is better than The Trouble with Bubbles from season 2 because Blundercup doesn't have any forced humor in it whatsoever. It's taken 100% seriously from beginning to end. Look at you, Reboot. You did good.